Hi everyone, Jonah here with Jonah Petty John Missions, and welcome back to another weekly Devo. So glad you could join me today. I am here in the garden of the host home where I am staying. It's a beautiful day out here in Greece. I got a mic this time, so hopefully that solves any audio issues. I know I've recorded outside for the last couple of weeks, and I didn't have a mic, so it was a little iffy, but this week we should be good. And this week I actually wanted to get back to the series that I had started before I even left the States. We were talking about the example that Moses set while he was in Egypt pleading with Pharaoh to let the children of Israel go, and the example that he set of basically holding on to the promises of God and responding to God's promises well. And what I wanted to highlight here was some interesting interactions that Moses had with Pharaoh while the 10 plagues were happening. It was during this whole exchange. It was interesting is that when God told Moses, go tell Pharaoh to let my people go, it wasn't necessarily this huge declaration of total freedom. It wasn't like, let my people go completely and never have to come back. Actually, the instruction was that Moses was supposed to request that Pharaoh let his people go. It was a 3-day journey into the wilderness to sacrifice to their Lord for, I don't remember exactly how long, but it was a period of a few days. And then they would come back to the land of Egypt. That was all that the request was. It was just for a brief reprieve period to go into the wilderness to worship the Lord and offer sacrifices to him. And then they were going to come back. And Pharaoh was obviously refusing that, as we know. This is how the story goes, right? He refused them that plea. But during the 10 plagues, there were several times where Pharaoh changed his mind. And he says, okay, while the plague is going on, he tells Moses, hey, come back, come back, come back. All right, go and ask your God to make this plague end, right? And then I will let you and your people go into the wilderness to make their sacrifices. Moses pleads to the Lord removes the plague, and then Pharaoh completely changes his mind. It says that his heart is hardened, that he sins, and that he then goes back on his word and refuses to let the people go. And obviously, you can imagine for Moses and Aaron and for the children of Israel, this would have been an incredibly disappointing thing, especially the fact that they encountered it so many times, because Pharaoh did this many, many times. But there's also some interesting interactions in which Pharaoh, he says that they can go, but he tries to bargain with them a little bit. And the first interaction like this happens in Exodus chapter 8. And we're going to start in verse 25. So if you have your Bibles, we'll start in Exodus chapter 8 in verse 25. So this is the middle of the plague of flies, right? So Egypt is experiencing the plague of flies, and Pharaoh has had enough of it. And so it says here that then Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron and said, go sacrifice to your God within the land. But Moses said it would not be right to do so, for the offerings we shall sacrifice to the Lord our God are an abomination to the Egyptians. If we sacrifice offerings abominable to the Egyptians before their eyes, will they not stone us? We must go 3 days' journey into the wilderness and sacrifice to the Lord our God as he tells us. So Pharaoh tries to bargain with them. He says, look, I'm going to let you go, but you have to do it within this land. And Moses stands firm on the promise of God and says, no, that's not what the Lord said to do. Now, Pharaoh does this a couple more times. If we just flip the page and we go over to chapter 10, we start in verse 8. So this is in the middle of the plague of locusts. Okay, so the plague of locusts was an incredibly severe one. And Pharaoh has again decided to change his mind, but he's not going to give them exactly what God has commanded. So it says in verse 8, so Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh, and he said to them, go serve the Lord your God. but which ones are to go? Speaking of the children of Israel, who's going to go, right? And Moses said, we will go with our young and our old. We will go with our sons and our daughters, with our flocks and herds, for we must hold a feast to the Lord. And then Pharaoh responds, but he said to them, the Lord be with you if I ever let you and your little ones go. Look, you have some evil purpose in mind. No, go the men among you and serve the Lord, for that is what you are asking. And they were driven out from the presence of Pharaoh. So again, Pharaoh is opting to let the children of Israel go, but under his own conditions, not in agreement with the instructions of God. He says, you can go, but only the men are going to go. We're not going to let any of the kids, none of the women, none of that stuff. And then he does it again in chapter 10 as well. If we read on, now it's the plague of darkness, which is the 9th plague. Okay. And again, Pharaoh has enough. So he calls Moses, and this is in verse 24. It says, then Pharaoh called Moses and said, go serve the Lord. Your little ones also may go with you. Only let your flocks and your herds remain behind. But Moses said, you must also let us have sacrifices and burnt offerings that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. Our livestock also must go with us. Not a hoof shall be left behind, for we must take of them to serve the Lord our God, and we do not know with what we must serve the Lord until we arrive there. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let them go. So again, this is the final time where Pharaoh, knowing that he's on the weaker side, knowing that he's not winning this battle, right? With all the plagues that are overtaking Egypt, he tries to get them to compromise and says, okay, everybody can go now, but you can't bring your flocks and your herds with you. And I think this is, or for the average person, if you have ever experienced receiving a promise from the Lord before or a word from God, I think this is something that we can all attest to happening. It's the testing of our resolve. See, that is what the enemy is doing through Pharaoh here. He's saying, all right, I'm going to give you a portion of what you asked for, right? The Lord's given you an instruction. He's given you a promise. You know exactly what God has asked you to do, but you've been tested many times. You thought you were going to get it, and then it was pulled away from you. You thought you were going to get it, and it was pulled away from you like Pharaoh did. He said every time, okay, you can go if the plague would just stop. And then the plague would stop, and then he would completely take back his word and he wouldn't let them go, right? And now he's realizing, I'm going to have to eventually let these guys go, but I'm going to see if I can get them to compromise on what God has instructed them to do. I'm going to see if I can weaken the resolve enough to the point where once I just give them any sort of leeway, they're willing to run with it and compromise because something is better than nothing, right? And Moses does an excellent example here of exactly what you should do when you're presented with options that seem good. It seems better than what you've been getting before, right? It seems like there's some sort of breakthrough happening here, but it's not exactly what God instructed. It's not exactly what God wanted from you. It's not exactly what God told you that you were going to get. You got presented with something that was less than what God offered, but it's better than what the world has been offering you. And so you think, all right, well, you know what? Maybe I should just take the compromise here. But Moses, every single time, what does he say to Pharaoh? All he does is he just repeats the words of God's command, right? God commanded the whole nation go out into the wilderness and offer sacrifices, right? Pharaoh wanted them to stay in the land and offer sacrifices. He said, no, God wants us out. And then he said, okay, you can go, but only the guys. And Moses says, no, God said the whole nation. And then Pharaoh goes, okay, the whole nation can go and you can go out of the land, except you got to leave all of your flocks and herds here. And Moses says, no, the Lord said all of the flocks and all of the herds, because how else are we going to offer sacrifices? And every single time they left empty-handed. Moses did not get even a portion of what he wanted every time he had these encounters with Pharaoh. But ultimately, by sticking to it, the Lord kept performing work after work and miracle after miracle after miracle. And the people were set free. And it wasn't just for a few-day period to go and offer sacrifices. It was forever. So, like I said, this whole series has been about the example that Moses has set of pursuing and believing on the promises of God. So I would say to you that if God has given you a promise or a word or an instruction that you are waiting to see fulfilled, or that you are actively trying to fulfill, and it seems like, hey, this is not working out. I have had opportunity after opportunity to see it come through, but it keeps falling flat. And now you're being offered something similar, but not exactly what God had said, but it's close enough, right? It's just close enough to be tempting. Don't let the enemy tempt you with something that is less than what God has offered you, right? Don't let the enemy tempt you into taking something less than what God has promised or God has said that he was going to do. You need to get with the Lord. You need to write that word down. Whatever that promise or instruction is, you got to write it down. You can take that piece of paper. You can, I don't know, staple it to your door, tape it to your door, do something, have it in front of you so that you always know exactly what the Lord has instructed and you settle for nothing less. Thank you all so much for joining me this week. I hope to see you again next week. God bless. Bye.